Growing plants is getting harder, more expensive, more complex, increasingly more difficult. I'm Chad Massura, CEO and founder of Rosie, and this is How We Grow. Hey everyone, welcome back to How We Grow. I'm super excited to be joined today by Dr. Ping Yu, who is an assistant professor and ornamental extension specialist at the University of Georgia. She focuses on soilless media and peat alternatives, especially biochar, which we're going to have fun talking about, both in the kind of greenhouse and nursery production space, but also thinking a lot about everything from weed management to plant disease to practical IPM. So super excited to have Dr. Yu on the show today. And thanks for joining us.
Hey, Chad, thank you for having me. I am very excited about the conversation we're about to have, and always happy to talk about biochar.
Wonderful.
In any circumstances.
Wonderful. Same here. Yeah. And as you said before we started recording, we could talk about this for hours. So we're going to do our best to try and condense probably tons of biochar nerdiness into a couple of minute discussion here. But before we dive in, I'm super curious just on your kind of story and background. How did you get into this space? How did you get excited about hort and biochar, and tell us a little bit more about the kind of arc of your career.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in China, southwestern China, and where I share hometown with the giant panda, if that makes you more understand where I come from. But I grew up there and did my bachelor and master degree in there, all focused on ornamental horticulture. And at the beginning, I thought about going to the architecture or landscape design road, but it didn't work out for me. So I stick with the ornamental plants production. And then there was one chance that I got to meet a professor from Texas A&M University, and we started chat, and they were like, "Oh, you should be a good PhD material for this." I'm like, "Okay." So I did applied and
just to pause real quick, I mean, what made a young person so excited about ornamentals and horticulture? Like, what sent you down this path in the first place?
I grew up with plants, basically. So my first endeavor, I'm glad that you you pointed out, my first horticulture endeavor was actually when I was about 9-year-old. We have a competition with my peer friends back then, and the competition is about to germinate the gardenia, and we just basically go cut some of the cuttings from our neighbors with a gardenia cuttings, and we just insert it into the soil with the surface irrigation system, where that's how you grow rice. And then a couple weeks later, we go and check and see if the plant germinated or rooted. And of course, I won the competition. So it was basically my first endeavor in horticulture. And back then, I didn't know that would have such a huge impact for me to continue the journey. And then, like I said, when I was doing my undergraduate, I thought I'm going to be an architecture or landscape designer, spending hours of drawing and in front of computer and all that. And then I quickly realized that's not something I was excited about, but I got excited about when I was around plants, and then that's how I ended up going to get my master degree in horticulture and continue the road. So
yeah, that's amazing. So then you came over to Texas A&M to do graduate studies. When was that, and what were you studying?
It was back in 2017. Oh my gosh, almost 10 years ago. And my PhD dissertation was on biochar. We are exploring using biochar as a peat moss alternatives for container crops production. And of course, for my dissertation as a good graduate student, you have a lot of side projects, and two of my main goal for my dissertation was one from the production side and using it as an alternative for different plant production. And then the second part was to evaluate the effect of biochar for some of the soil-borne diseases for our now crop production. And specifically, we're looking at Phytophthora and peat because those two are like the main soil-borne diseases that has directly related to the water. They are also called water mold. So we are interested in doing that, and we did find some very fun, interesting results along the line. So that's how I get to know biochar. Honestly, before I started my PhD, I had no clue of what biochar is. And I started to reading more literature and find there's so much to do, and it just got me fascinated about this material.
Great. So tell me about those initial results. Like, how did you structure the experiment, and what were some of the key takeaways?
So we actually did a lot of trials. Well, just to begin with, so when we talk about biochar, we're talking about the byproduct generated from the pyrolysis process, and which is basically the chemical, thermochemical processes where we put biomass, no matter what the material is. We're talking about, green waste and pine bark, and then the rice hull or the straw, whatever you can think of. And then that was, the biochar was a byproduct of that. And so basically we tested, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 type of biochar back then.
Mm-hmm.
Some
what
of
were
them are
different feedstocks or different temperature profiles?
They're different feedstocks and temperatures. So one of them are like mixed hardwood biochar from a commercial biochar company that's located in Tennessee, I think. And that one was, gosh, I forgot. It's maybe like the temperature was 650. And then the other ones that we tested were sugarcane bagasse biochar, which is kind of produced around like 550. And there might be something else. But basically those two are the main biochar that I tested. And of course, those two, if your audience is aware of that, and those two can be very different, because when we talk about biochar, you have to know the feedstock and the production condition. The feedstock is definitely going to change the final property of the biochar. And of course, so does the production condition. So generally speaking, we are very cautious about the temperature because, the higher temperature is normally at least the pH of the biochar will increase, and so does some of the function groups in there, and the surface area and all that. So those two, in terms of using it as container or PMOS alternatives, some of the physical and chemical properties of the biochar needs to be really pay attention to. So I'm taking those two as an example. The mixed hardwood biochar is it's bigger in size, or the texture is bigger. And for the sugarcane bagasse biochar, they are finer. So if you are using it as a PMOS alternative, you kind of have to pay attention to the ratio as well, because if we, for instance, if we have with the mixed hardwood biochar, the more you incorporated it, then the water holding capacity and then the air space and bulk density would change accordingly. So is the sugarcane bagasse biochar, and those two are very distinctly different in the texture and also the pH. So the mixed hardwood biochar, I think they have the pH about 10, which is pretty high. Yeah. And then the sugarcane bagasse, they have acidic pH, which is about, if I remember correctly, 5.5. So the range of the biochar of those two type of biochar.
And did you end up mixing those two chars together in the experiment, or you kept them separate? Okay.
I kept them separate, and that's a good point, because I think in the future there might be some potential of kind of mixing the biochar together, because the texture of those two are so different, and so they can compensate in some ways to improve the property of the whole mix.
And we found something. We found something super similar. You're exactly right. Where one type of biochar does not equal another type of biochar. Feedstock really matters. Process really matters. And there's different, effectively, I would say, like pro and con profiles of different chars. And so what we have found is, mixing different types of feedstocks and production processes, and even post-production processes, you can start to really, I would say, like soften the edges of some of these chars and get them to complement each other, so you can actually go higher percentage of char in a mix relative to some of the other components.
Yeah, and some of the results that we find is quite surprising, because I remember the highest ratio that we developed, of course, we only tested on one or two type of ornamental crops. I think the highest one for the mixed horticultural biochar, the coarse texture one, was somewhere from 60% to 80%. It doesn't really negatively affect the plant performance, at least for the plant that we tested. And just to clarify, so you're just cutting this with a traditional peat perlite blend or something like that? With the commercial, yes.
Yeah.
With the commercial blends.
I think what you're saying is you're able to cut a commercial peat-based blend up to 80% with the wood-based biochar without seeing detriment to yield or whatever the metrics you were studying.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's exactly right. Yes, and and now one of the things that people are, right now I talked to some of the companies, and one of the concerns that they were having is, oh gosh, for some of those our mixes, we can only afford to mix up to 15% of biochar because of the cost. And I didn't know that back then, because when I was doing the trial, everybody wants to get rid of their biochar, and they can be pretty cheap. And for us, they were just like, hey, we got those biochar. Do you want them? It's free. So I had no clue of how expensive they can be, especially 10 years after we were done with that. So that's one of the things that I hear some of the companies that has been kind of concerned about increasing the incorporation rate of the biochar to their mix, because it can be pretty costly.
Yeah, and I think that starts to be the balance growers have to think through, right? Where you do, the higher percentages of char you go, if you're using the right char in the right mixes, you do continue to see increased benefits, but that cost keeps going up, and it's the cost relative to the other inputs, relative to peat or cocoa coir or perlite or whatever else they're using. And so I think the good news is that the cost of biochar has come down over the last 5 to 6 years, and I think there's a path for it to continue to do so, again, sort of relative to some of these other inputs that are now increasing in cost. And so you're exactly right. It becomes a agroeconomic analysis at that point to try to figure out where's the optimal char. And we spent a lot of time helping people think through that exact question.
But I was quite happy to say some of the subject mix companies started to introducing biochar mixes, like you guys included, because back then there's no single biochar mixes in the market. It's all pure researchers, or it's pure research, and we didn't see any adaptations or the commercialized of biochar mixes whatsoever. So I'm very, very happy to say, right now, it started to become a mainstream for that, which is supposed to. It does provide all those benefits. So,
Great.
I'm just happy that happened.
Same here, same here. So, and I want to get into kind of your work, you know, after your thesis, but I'm curious, just, you know, the high level results of it. Like, what were some of the, you know, what are some of the kind of takeaways from the study? What were some of the key benefits that biochar brought into a peat-based mix?
So basically, for the we did test it. So biochar for different purposes, including from propagation perspective, production, and disease reduction, or suppression, I would say more accurately. So from the propagation perspective, and of course, if growers wants to adapt some of those, they need to be prepared to select the right char. In this case, if they have to choose from the sugarcane bagasse biochar versus the mixed hardwood biochar, I would prefer the mixed hardwood. Well, I would prefer the sugarcane bagasse biochar just purely because the texture. But in the meantime, you can still mix the hardwood biochar with the right recipe of other amendments or with other components. So for that one, we actually find out the mixed hardwood biochar did fine with sugarcane bagasse biochar for propagating both basil and tomato plants. So they actually, the 70% of mixed hardwood biochar produce the highest or the best seedlings among all the treatments we give.
Wow.
But if we transplant those propagated seedlings into the commercial mixes for 4 weeks after that, all those treatments, well, not all of them, but all the biochar amended mixes, even with the high percentage, didn't have any difference compared to the commercial one. So it really showed the potential of using it for propagation mix as well. And after that, we did do the trials for just using the different types of biochar at different ratio to produce those container plants, including tomato and basil, petunia. There's so many, and really 70% or 80% of the mixed hardwood biochar did not significantly had lower or negative impact for the plant performance for the yield. But it did somewhat, so the higher percentage you're getting with the biochar, the more likely you will encounter nutrient deficiency issues. I guess it has something to do with the pH, because remember the pH of the biochar was pretty high. So if we're incorporating 80% of the mixed hardwood biochar in the mix, the pH of the mix may be range about somewhere in like 8 or 9-ish. So that can be a trigger for nutrient deficiency. It depends on what production cycle of the plant that you are shooting for and what type of plant you're producing. But anyhow, for general speaking, like the 40% would be pretty good and produce you a consistency outperformed plant than the control. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And so how has your biochar research continued? What have you been up to since those early days at Texas A&M?
I kind of take a break with the biochar for my postdoc, because I did about like 10 months of postdoc at the University of Florida and weight management. So it's a completely different field, kind of. But it was good learning experience, and I was able to see so many different perspectives, and I'm getting better understanding of the industry as a whole. And since I started my role here in Georgia about 4 years ago, I mean, I still, I have a heart for biochar and want to continue with that, and to at least to shape to lay the foundation of the biochar if down the road more company like you guys wanted to pick up all those results from the research and we have the framework already laid out. So I had one of my master students work on the biochar, and she graduated last year. And she was kind of like in evaluating different type of biochar and also more in-depth understanding what additional benefits that biochar can bring. For instance, how biochar can mitigate the drought stress or the salt stress, because those two are basically very common stresses that our industry is facing, well, generally agriculture. So she was able to find out that some of the biochar mixes, especially for instance, for one of the studies that she did for irrigation, or the drought stress study, she did find that at the medium rate, I think she did 15% of the biochar. It did provide additional mitigation for drought stress for the plant. Similar for the salt stress, she find that biochar had benefits of mitigating some of the salt stress for the plants as well. So it's really from all those projects that we started, it just to give me more and more confident that this whole thing is like a black golden type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
So it's yeah.
I love it. And so when you have growers come to you with maybe specific problems, or they're trying to just improve their processes, what are your kind of initial recommendations as it pertains to biochar? How do you recommend people kind of dip their toe in and get started?
So that's one of the things that I want to hear more, because as I alluded early in the conversation, I'm glad that this whole thing, the biochar, has become more like a mainstream. But it's not to the point where comparing to other mixes for commercial growers, because my key stakeholders are commercial growers, and their adaptations are not to the level compared to, for instance, homeowners. And like your target audience or the clientele would be the homeowners as well. And so it's not to the point where, in terms of their adaptation, so I don't normally get a lot of those type of questions in regarding to biochar from the commercial growers. However, I do occasionally get some of the, maybe the company or the homeowner or someone just wanted to experimenting, and they are trying to test some of the biochar materials. And I remember one of the questions that I got is, hey, I'm doing great with the biochar, and this is how I produce it. And so based on his description, I'm like, hey, dude, I'm happy that you know biochar and you want to try it, but what you're putting out there is ash, not biochar.
Okay.
That's why I specifically kind of give a definition of what is biochar. It has to be produced in a certain way to be classified as biochar, because people just there are some misunderstanding of biochar, especially with some of the homeowners, and they think that burning it, it's the biochar. It's not. It's ash. So it has to be condensed in a oxygen-free or limited atmosphere to be able to have the biochar, and so that it can provide you all those benefits that we mentioned before. And so for others, some of those are more, I know from the agriculture perspective, I know some of the growers from the field, especially in the forestry capacity, they use biochar in so many different ways and in a larger scale, but not to the green industry yet. We are making progress of educating people and try to, especially like the one challenges that you or barriers you mentioned before, the costs. I'm excited to see how people's perception of biochar will change down the road, especially for commercial growers.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And as you look towards the future of this industry and as you think about, different use cases for biochar, like what are some of the trends that you're super excited about? Or, if I put it differently, what are some of the things the academia plus industry need to still kind of figure out and solve to remove some of the bottlenecks around char?
I think the research is out there, and we have laid out a lot of framework for biochar adaptation. And so if growers are interested, they can grab those information and start using it. I think right now, one of the challenges we're facing for substrates in general in our industry is that people are looking for peat alternatives no matter what, just because the unpredictable weather and that can definitely affect the peat moss harvest and also some of the restrictions in Europe. And I guess not so much will affect us because 92% of our peat moss are coming from Canada, but still with the uncertain environment, people are going to look for more domestic materials just so that they can have the security of having those materials in hand. So I think people are going to continue looking for more peat moss alternatives down the road, and I think that's good for biochar because they definitely provide that stability. In terms of the supply, I guess one of the bottleneck would be really people's perception and the costs. And more importantly, finding companies, you guys might have this experience as well, to really find the suppliers that can provide you the high quantity of the biochar. The consistency is really, it's one of the key factors that our growers were looking for, because if they can find a consistent products for their production, they don't have to constantly changing their practices, because that can be very costly if you combine everything. Yeah,
definitely. And it's the balance. I think the industry's been through a bit of a chicken and egg problem where it's hard to scale the supply side without the demand side, and vice versa. So that's one of the things we've really focused on is diversifying our supply chain, both to find just the best chars out there that work for the various use cases we have, but also so that, to your point, we can continue to scale and provide the consistency that people expect out of this product, and really the consistency that biochar should provide at scale.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, for the demand, I don't think it's going to be an issue. We are going to, the industry is expanding, and people are going to look for more and more those substrates or soilless substrates components, and so that kind of prevent a huge opportunity for materials like biochar to be entered as a mainstream. I mean, down the road, it's going to be a very flexible type of thing. It's not going to be all suit for all type of situation. People are going to look for their own customized substrates, and there's no one materials will 100% replace peat moss, that's for sure. But I just think that the demand is out there, and that provide a huge opportunity for biochar use in at least in our industry.
Definitely. Well, on that note, I think it's a wonderful place to end here. I super appreciate your time. I guess two last questions. One, if folks want to go deeper on some of your work and research, where would you point them? And if they wanted to kind of follow along in the future, where should they go?
I'm pretty active in LinkedIn, so they can find me on LinkedIn. I normally posted all of what's going on with my lab, and some of my. I also have a podcast, and so I sometimes post the podcast in there. And I have a Google Scholar profile. They can just find my name, and I have all my papers are in there. We also have a website from UGA. We have some materials in there, and they can also find my email address and contact info there if they want to, contact me for anything or ask me any questions about biochar and any other related questions. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a super fun conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me. It's great.